The 1980s were supposed to be Britain's automotive renaissance. After the strikes, the oil crises, and the industrial chaos of the previous decade, the industry had a chance to rebuild its reputation and prove that British engineering still meant something to the world. Some manufacturers rose to that challenge. Others did not. In fact, some produced cars so catastrophically bad that they didn't just damage their own brands, they damaged the entire nation's credibility as a car-making power. These are the 10 most hated British cars of the 1980s, and number 1 was such a big disaster that it changed everything. Number 10. Austin Maestro. In 1983, British Leyland introduced the Austin Maestro with the kind of fanfare that suggested they genuinely believed they had turned a corner. Here was a modern hatchback, a genuine competitor to the Ford Escort and the Volkswagen Golf, designed to prove that Longbridge could build cars the British public actually wanted. The Maestro featured a 1.3-litre engine in base trim and a more spirited 1.6-litre option higher up the range. On paper, it looked promising. In reality, it began falling apart almost immediately. Owners reported persistent electrical gremlins, poorly fitted trim that rattled endlessly, and bodywork that began rusting faster than almost anything else on British roads at the time. There was even a talking dashboard version that drivers found so irritating it became a national joke. The press was brutal. The public was skeptical. And British Leyland, despite all its promises, had delivered yet another near-miss that frustrated an entire generation of loyal buyers. But the next car managed something even worse. Number 9. Austin Montego. A year after the Maestro stumbled out of the gates, British Leyland tried again with the Austin Montego. This was the family saloon that was meant to compete with the Ford Sierra and the Vauxhall Cavalier in Britain's most fiercely contested market segment. Expectations were cautiously high, and the 1.6-litre and 2.0-litre engine options gave it at least a credible mechanical foundation. But the Montego suffered from exactly the same problems that had plagued every car British Leyland released in this era. The build quality was deeply inconsistent from car to car, electrical systems failed without warning, and the interior felt assembled in a hurry by people who had somewhere better to be. Dealers were overwhelmed with warranty complaints within months of launch. Fleet buyers, who had once been loyal to Austin products by default, began looking elsewhere in large numbers. The Montego never recovered its reputation. And that was a wound British Leyland simply could not afford. The next entry on this list embarrassed its manufacturer in an entirely different way. Number 8. Talbot Horizon. The Talbot Horizon arrived in Britain carrying the baggage of a brand that had already lost the public's confidence. When Chrysler sold its European operations to Peugeot in 1978, the newly created Talbot marque was given one final chance to establish itself. The Horizon, built at the Lingwood plant in Scotland and later at Ryton in Coventry, was a front-wheel drive family hatchback with reasonable ambitions and a 1.3-litre engine that promised adequate performance for the school run and the motorway alike. What it delivered instead was a catalogue of quality control failures so severe that many dealerships reportedly dreaded seeing one return for a service. Rust appeared on early examples with alarming speed. Trim fell away from dashboards within months. The Lingwood factory, always troubled by industrial disputes, produced cars with a worrying inconsistency in build standard. By the mid-1980s, the Talbot name had become almost unsellable, and the Horizon went down as one of its most visible failures. What comes next, however, involves a name that should have known far better. Number 7. Rover SD1 V8. The Rover SD1 had been launched in the late 1970s to genuine acclaim, winning European Car of the Year in 1977. By the early 1980s, however, the shine had come off almost completely, and the reason was one that still frustrates enthusiasts today. The SD1's 3.5-litre V8, a beautifully characterful engine with genuine power and presence, was buried inside a car that seemed determined to self-destruct around it. Paint peeled. Electrics failed. Panels corroded at a pace that defied belief for a premium product. Interior quality fell well below what buyers paying premium prices had every right to expect. Company car drivers, who formed the backbone of the SD1's customer base, began refusing to order them after horror stories circulated through boardrooms across the country. Here was a car with genuine greatness at its mechanical heart, destroyed entirely by the hands that built it. The real tragedy was that the potential was always there. But potential meant nothing when the car simply would not hold together. The story behind the next car is almost unbelievable. Number 6. Triumph Acclaim. The Triumph Acclaim holds the unfortunate distinction of being the last car ever to wear the Triumph badge, and it wore it awkwardly. Produced under a collaboration with Honda, the Acclaim was essentially a rebadged Honda Ballard, fitted with a 1.3-litre engine and sold to British buyers who were told they were purchasing a genuine piece of British motoring heritage. Many saw through it immediately. Enthusiasts who remembered the TR6, the Spitfire, and the Stag were appalled that the Triumph name had been reduced to a Japanese car wearing a British costume. The public reaction was complex. Some appreciated the improved reliability that came with Honda's engineering input, while others felt betrayed by what felt like the slow erasure of a beloved British brand. Sales were modest, the reviews were lukewarm at best, and when production ended in 1984, almost nobody mourned the Acclaim itself. What they mourned was the name it had dragged down with it. But what happens next involves a failure on an almost industrial scale. Number 5. Morris et al. The Morris et al. Was, even by the standards of this list, a remarkable act of corporate stubbornness. By 1980, the car it was based on, the Morris Marina, was already nearly a decade old, and the Marina had never been loved in the first place. British Leyland gave it a mild facelift, renamed it the Ital, hired the Italian design house Italdesign to provide some cosmetic credibility and sent it into a market that had already moved on entirely. The 1.3 and 1.7-litre engines were carried over largely unchanged, and they brought with them all the reliability issues that Marina owners had been complaining about throughout the 1970s. Handling was poor. The structure was old. Rust arrived quickly and stayed permanently. Motoring journalists could barely contain their disbelief that British Leyland had chosen to revive rather than replace something so thoroughly outdated. Buyers deserted it in droves. The Ital was discontinued in 1984, and almost no one noticed it had gone. Number 4. Reliant Robin. Few British cars in history have inspired the level of public mockery that the Reliant Robin accumulated throughout the 1980s. The three-wheeled, fiberglass-bodied vehicle from Tamworth had existed since the 1970s, but the 1980s were the decade in which it became a fully established national joke. Its 848 cubic centimeters four-cylinder engine produced around 40 brake horsepower, which was just enough to propel three wheels down the motorway at a pace that made every other road user nervous. The fundamental problem was physics. With only one wheel at the front, the Robin had a deeply unsettling tendency to roll over during cornering if the driver applied too much enthusiasm, and documented accidents of exactly this kind became part of its growing legend. Insurance companies viewed them with suspicion. Other drivers gave them a wide berth. And the British public, which had tolerated the Robin for years, turned it into a symbol of everything embarrassing about domestic motoring. But compared to what comes next, even the Robin looks respectable. Stay with us, because number 3 is where this list gets genuinely dark. Number 3. Aston Martin Lagonda. The Aston Martin Lagonda should have been the jewel of British luxury motoring in the 1980s. Priced at over £30,000 at a time when that sum could buy an entire street in parts of northern England, the Lagonda promised its wealthy clientele something genuinely extraordinary, a hand-built British Grand Tour equipped with cutting-edge digital technology that no other manufacturer had attempted at this level. The 5.3-litre V8 engine gave it genuine performance credentials, and the wedge-shaped styling turned heads everywhere it appeared. But the digital dashboard, the car's defining feature and primary selling point, was an engineering catastrophe. Sensors failed without warning. Displays went dark on the motorway. Dealerships across Britain admitted they had no reliable method of diagnosing or repairing the faults. Owners who had paid a small fortune for the pinnacle of British craftsmanship found themselves stranded in cars that their own dealers could not fix. The humiliation was complete, the reputation permanent. And yet even this was not the worst story on this list. Number 2. Jaguar XJS. The Jaguar XJS arrived wearing one of the most famous names in British motoring history, and that name alone was its greatest burden. When the E-Type had retired in 1975, enthusiasts around the world had mourned its passing and waited eagerly for whatever Jaguar would produce next. What they got was the XJS, a Grand Tourer with a 5.3-litre V12 engine that produced genuine performance but consumed fuel at a rate that made petrol station attendants visibly nervous. In the early 1980s, as Britain wrestled with economic hardship, a car that returned single-digit miles per gallon felt almost offensive. But the fuel consumption was only the beginning of the problem. Electrical reliability was catastrophic. Lucas Electronics, already notorious among British car owners, seemed to have outdone itself entirely. Owners reported failures so frequent and so random that the cars became genuinely difficult to depend upon. Jaguar's reputation, already fragile, took serious damage throughout this period. The XJS was not a bad car at its mechanical heart, but it arrived at the wrong time, with the wrong problems, carrying expectations it was never equipped to meet. And yet even this disappointment pales against what comes at number 1. Number 1, Austin Ambassador. If any single car represents the terminal collapse of British Leyland's credibility, it is the Austin Ambassador. Launched in 1982 as a replacement for the aging Princess, the Ambassador arrived at precisely the moment when British Leyland could least afford another failure, and it delivered one on a spectacular scale. The car used a 1.7 or 2.0-litre O-Series engine and featured a hydrogas suspension system that should have delivered a refined, comfortable ride. Instead, the Ambassador was immediately criticized for its awkward styling, its cramped interior despite its generous external dimensions, and its deeply unimpressive build quality that made every rival look like a product of Swiss precision. Fleet managers who had reluctantly kept faith with British Leyland abandoned it almost instantly. Sales collapsed. Production ended after just 3 years, in 1984, making it one of the shortest-lived family cars in British automotive history. The Ambassador didn't just fail, it confirmed, loudly and publicly, that an era was over. The 1980s should have been a decade of recovery for British motoring. Instead, they became a decade of reckoning. Car after car from this list reminds us just how far the industry fell from the promise it once held, and how much that mattered to the workers, the families, and the communities built around those factories. Some of these cars are now cult curiosities. Others are simply forgotten. But every single one of them tells a story worth remembering. Tell us in the comments which one you hated most, or perhaps secretly loved. And if this journey through British automotive history resonated with you, subscribe to Britain Rewind, because there are plenty more forgotten stories still to uncover.